and we recognize the continued suffering, colonial dispossession, and still the trauma that our indigenous population face in this part of the land. This is a territory that belongs to the Ohlone people, and I can't be speaking as a Palestinian without giving recognition to the land and the people that have lived and continue to struggle to get their rights. Also that this is a land that our African American brothers and sisters were brought in here without really being invited, but rather brought in the hulls of ships. Between 15 to 30% of the African Americans that were brought in here are of Muslim background from West and Sub-Saharan Africa. And just recently we began to discuss about the reparations that are due to African Americans and the black communities. The state of California just actually articulated that each black member of California is owed about $1 million plus for the free labors that went on for 300 plus years in this continent. So we would like to really welcome all of you in this second conference under the ISRA banner, the International Islamophobia Studies and Research Association. And I would begin by actually inviting two of our colleagues here on campus to give welcoming remarks to all the participants. I will begin with Professor Keith Ellison, who is the current chair of ethnic studies at UC Berkeley, and he's a partner and continue to support many of the initiatives that we have here at UC Berkeley. So Keith. Also, this conference is live streamed, so we have many participants that are also participating from across the world.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome, and thank you so much, Dr. Bazian. My name is Keith Feldman. I'm a chair of the Department of Ethnic Studies here at UC Berkeley. And on behalf of the department, I really want to welcome you to Berkeley for this really always ever timely and in many ways urgent conference. As you may know, this is among the only scholarly conferences in the United States devoted to the subject of Islamophobia. And Berkeley has been the site for these convenings for the better part of 2 decades now. And to continue to have these conversations here is absolutely essential. It's also an honor to have ethnic studies in particular involved in the growth of scholarship and teaching about this essential topic. I'm so grateful to Dr. Bazian and all the conference organizers for the work you've done to bring us to this day. You should know that in addition to this conference, to the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project, and the Islamophobia Studies Journal, all of which have roots and nourishment grown from this campus, Berkeley has also offered a course taught in Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies by Dr. Bazian, entitled Islamophobia and Constructing Otherness. Year in and year out, the course is one of the most popular that the department offers, replete with large lectures and multiple discussion sections. Students on this campus are clearly hungry for the knowledge and insights that a deeply historical, comparative, and critical approach to Islamophobia can provide. Indeed, like the course, the conference's multidisciplinary reach, its global, comparative, and historical scope, and its eye on matters of policy make this convening especially vital. So, looking over the program, in the coming days, presenters will consider a wide range of national contexts, from Ireland, Sweden, and Turkey to Kashmir, India, Canada, France, and the United States. You'll take part in critical analysis of literary and cultural production, life on college campuses, the promise and challenges of documentation itself, questions of citizenship and belonging, and in just a few minutes, the World Cup. It's a packed and inspired agenda, and personally, as a scholar and teacher who works on these topics, let me say how excited and grateful I am for the knowledge you're bringing into the world. So welcome, and I wish you generative conversations in the days ahead.
Thank you, Keith. Our next welcoming remarks is from Professor Letty Volp. She's a professor of law at Berkeley School of Law, but also she's the director of the Center for Race and Gender. And the Center for Race and Gender was the place that actually welcomed the study and research on Islamophobia at a time where no one on campus or nationally wanted to actually have anything to do with Islamophobia. So our partnership with the Center for Race and Gender, Letty Volp, she also have a considerable scholarly work on immigration, on refugee, on citizenship, and her research, I think many of us have benefited from and continue to use in our classroom. So Letty.
That means so much to me to hear. Thank you so much. I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome you all to this important gathering on behalf of the Center for Race and Gender here at UC Berkeley. In 2009, the Center, or CRG, helped Dr. Hatem Bazian launch the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project here at UC Berkeley. The Center for Race and Gender was founded after, in the great tradition of Berkeley student activism, students in 1999 demanded that the university address a number of issues, including insufficient support for research on the critical study of race. The center is now a major interdisciplinary research center creating knowledge on critical intersections between race, gender, and social justice, and work that is both local and global, connecting scholars through transnational and emancipatory research. The Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project has been one of CRG's most important research initiatives. The initiative undertakes a systematic and empirical inquiry to better understand the phenomenon of Islamophobia. The center has been honored to create a home for this cutting-edge research. We cannot think of questions of race, gender, and social justice without foregrounding the question of Islamophobia, of anti-Muslim racism, and ways in which ideas about gender and sexuality are foundationally shaped by this racism. On behalf of CRG, we're thrilled to welcome you all to this first conference of the International Islamophobia Studies and Research Association. I'm really happy to see old friends and new faces. Your scholarship in this area is crucial and urgent, and it's thrilling to see how it's being conducted all over the world. I want to congratulate everyone on the launching of ISRA, this crucial creation of this network, and I'm really happy to welcome the Islamophobia Conference back to UC Berkeley. Thank you.
So just to give a continuation of history, in 2009, we started the work on researching and documenting Islamophobia at UC Berkeley. And the choice of where to locate the research was very important, as often the case when you deal with Islam and Muslims immediately is centered or sent to Middle East studies. And narrowing the scope of what research and what type of work needs to be done. There was an emphasis for us to actually broaden the discussion on issues of race, on ethnicity, on transnationality, on diaspora, on gender, and so on. So we approach actually Center for Race and Gender, as well as Asian American Studies and Asian Diaspora Studies, to locate the discussion on Islamophobia in that setting. So it would not be only an aspect of Middle East, considering that the largest Muslim population is actually in Asia, and the largest Muslim country is non-Arab and non-Middle Eastern in this sense. This is also not to problematize the category of Arab or Middle Eastern, because often post 9/11, many people actually, as a way to respond to Islamophobia, insisted that they're not Arab. And this became also to legitimize anti-Arab racism as a way to diminish the category of Arabness in the discourse here in the United States and Islamophobia. So our work was not to diminish the category, but also actually to create a broader category to think of Islamophobia in a much larger context than Middle East or Arabness, and also to think of diaspora, meaning Muslims in the West, in the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and increasingly some of those areas that have intense Islamophobia are areas like China or India, where we have tremendous experiences almost trending toward genocide. We held 15 conferences under the banner of Center for Islamophobia and IRDP here in Berkeley. And we held 9 conferences in France because our French colleagues, as a result of the limitation in France to do work on Islamophobia, we actually began to hold a December conference in France to make it possible for our French colleagues, those who engage in research in France and in Europe, to actually have a place to exchange ideas, to present their research and engage in the broader discussion. So there were 9 conferences in France on Islamophobia. In addition, both of our colleagues, Salman Sayed in Leeds University, as well as Jasmine Zain in Wilfrid Laurier University in Toronto, we've been also part of networks of critical Muslim studies, as well as work relative to grant proposals that generated the discussions among us. We actually spent almost 4 years to try to get the association launched with a major grant in Canada, but that grant did not go through. And as a result of our conversation, both in Europe and France, the result of it is the launch of ISRA as a international academic association to create the pipeline for a formal academic association to give legitimacy. Not that is needed, but there are individuals in universities that researching Islamophobia was seen almost as a non-starter. And we still have graduate students that to engage in research on Islamophobia, we will feel the challenges and the impediments, especially by our colleagues that anything related to Islam can be reduced often to a study of terrorism or how to counter terrorism. These are 2 dimensions that I would say intensify and continue to push Islamophobia in general as a discourse. So the association is very, very critical in really fixing an academic association with almost 200 faculty members that are engaged globally through the network that we have developed over the past 15 plus years. The third component of this work is that the association is centered on 2 important journals. One is the Islamophobia Studies Journal, which we already have been publishing 8 seasons, so we're almost on the 16th volume of it. And then Reorient, which is also edited by Salman Sayed. So these are the anchors for the research. As research in Islamophobia, often in some of the other academic journals, is not given the opportunity, or even people who engage in work on Islamophobia, they don't find the welcoming venue for them to actually publish their research. So those 2 anchors have become a tremendous place or a tremendous site for engaging in every aspect of the Islamophobia research. And you could both contact myself and Salman on some of the papers that you're presenting. We would like for you to submit these papers for review, and then after that for publication. We went into open source, and open source have its challenges, but so far our rate of access have almost increased by 7,000%. so across the globe in terms of our outreach and our presence within the academic arena. So that's our third component. The fourth component is that we are beginning to actually provide consultation and expertise on an individual level, but as we formalize the association more, this would become an important outlet for providing some of the expertise that we have, whether at a country level report. We published the first of its kind Islamophobia in India, stalking bigotry. 6 months ago, we published the report on Canada. We published one on Islamophobia in Russia, and we consulted also some of our colleagues in New Zealand and Australia in their work on Islamophobia, and we also work with Farid Hafiz on the European Islamophobia report that covers 38 countries. So this is a network of scholars that now is formalizing itself into the association. Lastly, let me say, building an association is not an easy task. Because we're not only building an association for the United States, it's an international association. And if you look at our board, it's reflective of this diversity and this outreach. We still have areas in the world that we still want to get people to be formalized engagement with the association. But this is a work, in essence, we say the revolution is a work of love. Working on constructing and building Islamophobia to try to protect as well as advocate for the targeting of Muslims at a global level. This is a time-consuming and work that often more time is not wasted, but more time that is dedicated to travel from across the world in order to get actually people to connect with us with the minutest budget, and also the minutest resources are available at our disposal. So I think of all the people that are connected, we think of ourselves as friends that are trying to basically move the mountain, with the mountain is actually sitting on top of us, both resource-wise, institutionally, as well as tremendously. And tomorrow we will have some discussions about the landscape of the Islamophobia and how does it look at a global level. So really, I thank you for continuing to trust in our work and connect with us. And I would turn the microphone to our colleague, Jasmine Zain. She's the Vice President of the ISRA Association. So please welcome her.
Okay, thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum and welcome to everyone. It's really fantastic to see so many people come for our second annual conference for ISRA. And as colleagues on the panel have already mentioned, the global landscape is deeply mired in violent forms of Islamophobic ethno-nationalism that are underwritten by various supremacist ideologies. And in the West, as we know, this has taken the form of Islamophobic white nationalism, which has increasingly targeted Muslims as the new folk devil. From hate crimes to state policies, Muslims are cast as subaltern citizens that are subject to surveillance, scrutiny, exile, and banishment. Globally, the genocide of Rohingya Muslims in Burma, the ethnic cleansing of the Uyghurs in China, India's Islamophobic state policies, and the ongoing oppression of Palestinians reminds us of the urgency to address and combat Islamophobia. But Islamophobia studies is also under siege, as scholars are increasingly targeted, harassed, intimidated, and subject to McCarthyist tactics. As well, the epistemic legacies within this field of study are often not acknowledged. So ISRA was formed to address these concerns from a scholarly horizon. I want to just share with you our vision and mission for ISRA. I think some of that will be in the conference agenda that you have. I think the mission is stated there, but I'll also share with you our vision, which is the aspirational goals of our organization. So ISRA will form the global architecture for the field of Islamophobia studies. In the Islamic tradition, the Arabic acronym for this academic association refers to a nocturnal journey leading to and spiritual insight known as ISRA. As an interdisciplinary scholarly network, ISRA draws on this meaning in the development of a global caravan dedicated to mobilizing academic knowledge that documents and challenges Islamophobia on a planetary scale. So that's the vision that we see as an aspirational goal for the work that we do together, and we invite you on this journey with us. And as far as our mission, ISRA supports the dissemination of academic research and publicly engaged scholarship on Islamophobia through academic fora that facilitate the transnational, multi-directional flow of knowledge across academia, policy, government, media, and global civil society. By engaging in knowledge mobilization activities such as networking, disseminating, exchanging, and supporting research-based knowledge, ISRA provides the hub for academic leadership in the field of Islamophobia studies. And so this is why we're gathered here today, to continue to build this hub of knowledge and knowledge mobilization, to build the network among scholars, to build the solidarity that we all need in times where Islamophobia work is increasingly politically fraught, and to help move this field forward in responding to the challenges that are very, very formidable globally that Islamophobia has presented us with on multiple levels. And so it's wonderful that we have interdisciplinary scholars here today who will be examining the various nuances of Islamophobia in transnational contexts through their own disciplinary purviews. And we hope that today's gathering helps us move further our vision, our mission, and our goal to be a public form of scholarship for Islamophobia studies that resonates to wider publics beyond just our academic sphere, but something that is responsive to the various issues that Muslim communities are facing worldwide. And so we hope to become the thought leaders in developing Islamophobia studies in a global and planetary scale. And so we are very pleased to have everyone here and welcome you to join us on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. And I'd like to welcome Professor Salman Sayed from Leeds University, Vice President also of ISRA.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. It's always a bittersweet moment to welcome people to a conference on Islamophobia. You're very joyful to see so many people being engaged with the topic, but then there's a sadness that they have to be engaged with the topic. In a sense that you'd want to have a conference. This is the last conference on Islamophobia because we have sorted out Islamophobia. It doesn't exist anymore. It's over. And this is one of the things that produces a challenge for Islamophobia studies. Behind it is the idea that the work that we do in academia in general, producing knowledge, will ultimately set us free. That the more we know about something, the better we are able to combat it, the more we will be able to make it a better place. And academics and universities pride themselves on making a difference, doing work that will make a difference. And when we try and do work in the academy, we have at the back of our mind the idea that somehow knowing something will help us make things better. And it's really deeply, deeply seated in us, and it's something that I think we are all implicitly involved in, and it becomes part of our identity. So what I have to say now might seem slightly unkind or perhaps too cynical, and that is to wonder that whether the production of knowledge about Islamophobia in itself actually can make the difference that we wanted to make the difference. And the reason why I want to do this is to maybe talk a little bit about how this kind of paradigm of knowledge producing policy, producing improved outcomes, which we implicitly believe in, doesn't seem to be working in relation to something like Islamophobia, or even if you want to go further back and say something like racism. In a sense, why is it that we still are having conferences about Islamophobia? Why is it we're still talking about racism? How good do we have to be as writers, as students, as academics to resolve these problems and move them in a way that they no longer make any kind of difference? What I'd like to suggest is perhaps one of the things that we want to do, and one of the things which I think is the impetus behind ISRA, is to deal with the production of Islamophobia in the field of Islamophobia studies itself. Now, this seems slightly overcomplicating or ironic, but let me try and illustrate this point. One of the more earlier formulations and appearances of the term Islamophobia occurs in the introduction to the second edition of Edward Said's Orientalism. And it's interesting that writing in 1985, which is long before 9/11, long before the War on Terror, he talks about the relationship between Orient and Islamophobia, calling a type of Islamophobia. That the production of knowledge about the Orient was at its heart also a production about knowledge about Islam, Muslims, Muslimness, and they didn't have to be empirically Muslim or empirically Islam, just images and imaginaries of what those things were. And I think it's always important to remember that relationship between Orientalism and Islamophobia, because a lot of this emphasis on Islamophobia studies has also led to a great wealth of literature, great wealth of writing on Islamophobia and related topics. But often those topics and that writing is itself not necessarily reflexive about how it appears. And I think one of the things about ISRA is really to try and bring the networks of scholarship and understanding together to treat it as a serious and rigorous subject with a history and a theoretical and a conceptual underpinning, which is not simply reducible to a straightforward empirical reporting of what's going on. So that's also important. So I guess one of the things that I want to say is that there are kind of two main tendencies that perhaps we need to be thinking about collectively in the conference, in the production of knowledge. Firstly, there is a presentism, that the idea that basically all social phenomenon, if it doesn't appear on television, it doesn't really exist. I was going to say if it doesn't appear on the History Channel, which basically has given up on the fascination with the Second World War to be more about alien invasions, etc. But the idea is still the same. If it's even if it's in black and white, it's too far away. So there's a tendency within the social sciences to become presentist about this, both in the way that we read, both in the way that we talk about things, and that has an impoverishing effect on the way that we understand phenomena. Allied to that is also what I would call something perennialist, which seems to be the opposite direction, which is that something like Islamophobia is seen to be almost existing in time immemorial, or the argument that's made that the first Islamophobe was Iblis himself, and after that it's just been downhill since. So one of those, the argument about the perennialist and presentist are actually, even though they look like they're opposites, they are the same argument structure. What they're doing is dehistoricizing. They either in one way the history is taken completely out of the picture, and in the other way history is also completely taken out of the picture. And what we need to have is a historical understanding, which is not simply an idea that something happened at the time, a moment of creation, and you can draw a straight line from here to then, this kind of very off-white quote about Plato to NATO. It reproduces itself even before, from Iblis to Islamophobia is just one full sweep. And that leaves out any kind of consideration of how it emerges, what the inflections might be, what may be its particular accents, etc. The second element of that is, I think, in a way that Islamophobia studies shares with study of racism and ethnicity quite often. And that is the tension and the balance between the experiential and telling a story about experiences, which is really, really important, but also the idea of what the conceptual purchase of the experiential should be. And again, there's no easy answer to that, but the idea of Islamophobia then simply becomes a collection of testimonies is very, very important. It's a way of giving the voice to the voiceless. But in itself, the testimony has to have only become significant if it can have a general meaning for something else or someone else. And it's that movement from the particular to the general, which is really, really often missed out when you simply are engaged with only the experiential without actually putting the experiential into the context. We may all experience various kinds of discriminatory practices, various kinds of exclusions. But unless we are able to narrate them in a broader understanding, we have no understanding of why we're experiencing them, and we simply just repeat that we are experiencing them. And the only way we can actually talk about why we experience them is resorting to a narrative that's already dominant, which would explain that. So to give you sort of idea around racism is this, that the general popular understanding of racism outside places like this would be that the existence of race causes racism. Yeah? That basically the reason why you have racism is because humans are divided into races, and then there is a natural reaction to that. Now the problem is this, that if you believe that, then you spend a lot of energy trying to disapprove the existence of race, and hoping that if you disprove the existence of race, racism will vanish. That's basically the strategy. And you could talk about there's no such thing as race, there's only the human race. However, I would like to suggest that perhaps we should think about the other way around. Racism causes or produces races. In which case, unless you work against racism itself, you are not going to get rid of racism. And all the various inflections around that through anthropology, the way that they've seeped into our different consciousness, that the idea that strangers or different people or others will always have a hostile relationship or a relationship of suspicion, is actually a product of racism, which produces races, which produces how those are actually policed, and which actually informs much of our understanding of how we think different kinds of otherness actually operates, including Islamophobia, including various other forms of exclusions. So there is then this idea that, well, is racism and Islamophobia are two distinct things because everybody knows that Muslims are not a race. But as I've said to you before, we also know that there's no such thing as races. What you see in Islamophobia is a very live, in real time, notion of racialization working. If you don't believe Muslims are a race, which you shouldn't because they're not racist, try going through an airport. The technology about airports has become so sophisticated, they can tell it's from Muslim beards. They can navigate how one is marked as being a Muslim when you go through an airport. And often the people who are doing the navigating may themselves identify themselves as Muslims. So there you see the process of racialization, which completely denies the idea of race as being a biological datum or something biological. Okay, so I want to just sort of finish with two more remarks that I want to make around this, really, is that I'd like to suggest that we should start thinking about Islamophobia as a way of regulating Muslimness by reference to a westernizing horizon. That Islamophobia is really about saying what it means to not be a Muslim, but Muslimness itself, what it means, whether it's linked with terrorism, extremism, misogyny, the various ways in which it's positioned, and what it does is deny the normative value of what is going forward. The Muslims are both out of time. Muslimness is out of time because it's not modern, and it's a denial of what is normal, what is considered normal within the framework of the social sciences. The social sciences are a great enterprise for producing normativity and normalization. It's important to remember the social sciences emerged at the same time as the imperial enterprises of the European empires, in a sense that we tend to forget that most of the universities of the world were patterned on a model of universities around about the mid-19th century. And does anyone know what was happening in the mid-19th century? It was also the age of empire itself. So the universities were producing knowledges which the empires were using, and they were validating those knowledges produced in the universities. This is a nice little loop, which we then call social sciences, in which our practices are validated by the world through the exercise of power, but we think it's a confirmation because the world is like this, rather than the fact the other way around. And just to illustrate this final point that I would want to say is, if you take the category of religion, for example, very easy. We all know there's something called religion, and Muslims have either too much of it, the wrong kind of it, or too little of it. It's there, right? But the very idea of religion itself is predicated on an Enlightenment understanding of Western Christianity. That's what a religion is. All religious studies start with that model. And anything that deviates from that is not a proper religion. And then you have to have these questions about, well, what is the correct boundary between religion and politics, when you start off with the idea that religion and politics are two different things, for example, because you say this is what religion is, because that's what religion was in Europe, read through the Enlightenment. So what this means, I would say to you, is that ultimately we can't study Islamophobia without studying the frameworks that produce the knowledge that we all inhabit, the knowledge of the social sciences, which means that we're talking about an enterprise 500 to 300 years old, in which case it means to do Islamophobia studies properly, I would suggest, is also to engage in decolonial thinking, because it's simply a recognition of the knowledge that we have has a particular genealogy, which cannot be separated from race, colonialism, and empire. And Islamophobia studies is only possible once the cracks appear in that edifice. And I think the animation behind ISRA and hopefully this conference is always, in a sense, aligned with that decolonial impulse, but also recognizing how that decolonial impulse has to be played out in a very different register when you talk about Muslimness, rather than, for example, the Atlantic focus of much of original or indigenous focus of much of decolonial thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Salman. Salman mentioned or referenced traveling in the airport. Traveling while Muslim is an endeavor by itself. You're treated always as a VIP, right? Very, very important person, and you get the 4 S's, right? And I always ask him to work on my lower back after a long flight. But more importantly, recently we had the leak of the no-fly list from the federal government, which has close to 1 million plus, 1,200,000 give or take. And CARE recent report showed that there is a correspondence between Muslim names and the no-fly list to the percentage of only almost 98%. So the government says we don't target Muslims, but the list that they have, 98%, again, they did the research, they sent the no-fly list to an independent investigating team to look at it and to track the names, 98%. So if your name Muhammad, right, you're on no-fly list, or on extensive security, Fatima, Khadija, right? So maybe Muslims should change their name to all to Bob, and then all of a sudden, I'm not recommended, this is a joke, because I know that post 9/11, many Muslims did change their name out of fear. But the reality is that there is a no-fly list, security list that is predominantly Muslim. And for us, when we work on Islamophobia, we compare the no-fly list today, the surveillance, to the COINTELPRO. Because the COINTELPRO operations in the 1960s that surveilled the civil rights movement, surveilled Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, the Black Panther Party, the American Indian movement, all of these were subject to the same type of securitization, surveillance. From a historical perspective, we have considerable archival material courtesy of the FBI. So as a Muslim, I always thank the FBI and our government for surveilling us, because 30 years from now, as we get freedom of information, we're going to have a trove of materials, right? Because they surveilled Muslims. And if you happen to visit New York, actually call the New York Police Department to ask them where is the best falafel place and best cafes, because they actually surveilled the community, identifying the cafes, the restaurants, and so on. So instead of trying to go to Yelp for the best chicken tikka masala, call the police department New York, say where is the best spicy food, because they identified literally the name of the cafe, the owner, how many chairs and seats, and who frequents it, and so on. So I didn't know that our taxes are developing a government Yelp service in this way. But again, reality is the theater of the absurd. Islamophobia makes it possible for this type of initiatives to be undertaken to surveil a community in mass, including securitization relative to travel and so on. Now, this is the second conference. We already agreed as a board. Yesterday we had a board meeting to host the next conference in Sarajevo. So it'll be in Bosnia in May 2024. And it's very important to contextualize the history. As the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many in the press said that this did not happen in Europe since World War II, which completely absented the fact that there was a genocide in Bosnia, that there were 300,000 that were subject to this genocide, that are 60,000 women were raped as a part of using rape as an instrument of war, as a war crime. And then more importantly, when the Christchurch attack took place, the attacker had Serb statements and writings on his gun, and he was playing a Serb nationalist song in the background, as well as he visited Bosnia and the Balkans in a way to actually think that this is the methods or the approach to deal with Muslims, especially the replacement theory becoming so dominant and frequently cited as the problem of Muslims being in the West. So the next conference in May 2024 will be in Sarajevo, Bosnia. And we're open for proposals for 2025. If your campus, your university, your country would like to sponsor the conference to come in, we are beginning to at least plan 2 years ahead of time in such a way that we'll be able to create those networks. So again, in 2024, we'll be in Bosnia, but also it's the 100-year anniversary of the end of the caliphate. So it's also symbolic in terms of what has taken place in Bosnia and the Balkans. So 2025, we're accepting proposals for this, and the board will actually accept proposals to say which will be the next location. Last year we were in Ibn Khaldun University in Turkey for the launch. This year we're back in here in Berkeley. Next year is in Bosnia, and 2025 will be open to these discussions. So thank you for coming, for participating. We'll take a short break and set up the first panel to start this conference. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.